Hey, kia ora, Markie here, the grizzled walrus of YouTube. Feeling particularly grizzled today. Still not very well, but obsessive thoughts running through my head about H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft. That would be, I guess Lovecraft would make sense as a name for a surgical procedure. Anyway, a bit gone out, so there may be other faux pas of a similar ilk. So H.P. Lovecraft. Why am I talking about H.P. Lovecraft? Well, a number of reasons. One is I've never read him and was always aware of him, and I do a series called Psych Songs, the Psych Songs series, which is alliterative and sibilant, and it's all about me kind of looking at certain song lyrics that say something about psychology or the human condition, and just exploring that through the use of the song lyrics. I did one on a song by the Fields of Nephilim, which had some Lovecraftian references in it. And off the back of that, a friend of mine, who I shall name and shame, Gary Tate, sent me a Lovecraft compendium, because I said in the video that I've not read Lovecraft. And having had a bit of time off and also not being very well recently, I decided to read a bit of Lovecraft. Probably isn't a good thing to read when you're a little bit feverish. But there you go, I did read a bit of Lovecraft for the first time. So this video is, so what struck me really was the most interesting thing about reading Lovecraft was what his work said about him, because it was, to me it was immediately very Freudian. So I wanted to talk about that. Now, these are my first impressions. So I haven't read a lot of Lovecraft at the moment, about halfway through this compendium, and I just wanted to share my initial thoughts. Now, those of you who know a lot more about Lovecraft may kind of think, oh dear God, Markie's got it, completely wrong here. And that's kind of fine, just politely let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I have to say about Lovecraft. Obviously I've looked at a couple of biographies of him and watched a couple of documentaries on him, some on YouTube, so I'll see if I can remember to put a link to one of them, at least one of them below. So what do we know about Lovecraft? Well, where do we start really? Where's the best place to start with Lovecraft? Why the long face? That's the first question. That joke really makes sense if you've seen a photograph of him. He's a very long face. He looks a bit like Lurch. So Lovecraft's father disappeared off into what back in the day would have been called an asylum, and he had syphilis. Lovecraft had a very unusual upbringing, childhood, and life in general, really. But this happened with his dad. His mother also ended up dying in, I think it was the same asylum, much later. Whether she had syphilis or not, I don't know. And I'm guessing that Lovecraft never knew his dad had syphilis or the implications of that, or maybe he found out later, or maybe kind of on some subliminal level he kind of knew that there was something kind of murky in his past and in his heritage. Okay, and I think I'll say that sentence again. On some level I think he knew he had something murky in his past and in his heritage, because I think those precise words nail it really. And they also account for his racism, okay, because he's a rampant fierce racist. Okay, so yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? Because syphilis can cause some mental health conditions. So it may not have been public knowledge that it was syphilis that was behind those. But there's so basically what I'm kind of saying really is that there were murky secrets in Lovecraft's family past, in his family history, and also there were some grandiose pretensions in his family history as well, because understood himself to have come from aristocratic bloodlines, European. So he's American, aristocratic European bloodlines. Okay, and the family kind of hit major poverty and downsized. And at that point, when he was very young, I think he was 14 when this happened. His immediate response was to be suicidal. Okay, so so it's interesting. So there are kind of pretensions towards grandeur and aristocracy, and in his writing, he kind of he speaks very highly of people of good. He talks about people of good breeding, and then he uses terms like that. And he also seems to idealise the Scandinavians, which kind of really kind of resonates with kind of Hitler and the German Nazis and all that kind of Aryan super race stuff. Okay, so what strikes me about Lovecraft? Okay, so I've not read very much. I have to say I'm not over impressed with him as a writer. I think a lot of his stories are quite. Maybe I'm being unfair because he was a pioneer. So the ideas that maybe that he came up with for his stories have been done to death by other people since, but they seem a bit like, I could kind of see that coming, or is that it? Is that the story? But the thing I'm noticing is a thread. There's lots of threads, and it's like almost every story has got very much the same moods, if you like. But there's a very strong thread of disgust. He uses the word mould an awful lot. Mould as in mildew, mould. Talks about things like green ooze and things being, putrescent and that kind of thing. So there's a very strong element of fear that can drive you mad, and there's a very strong element of disgust, of things being foul and noxious, and that seems to go. And it seems to be a bit over the top as well. He talks about things. Maybe actually, his language seems to be quite extreme when he's talking about some of these things. And he uses a certain kind of adjectives on people, particularly people of mixed race, okay, or people of non-Aryan race, okay, which is kind of interesting. The other thing that I noticed that stands out very strongly is its huge kind of themes about things being dark things in underground places, down at dark tunnels or hidden away. I can't remember the individual stories, but things that are. So there's one story. It's kind of about somebody that kind of can't really remember their origin, and they start climbing up a tower, and they think they're surrounded by a forest, but then they climb up this tower and they end up in a on ground level and visit a house where there's a party going on, and everyone runs away screaming, and then the subject of the story eventually sees himself in the mirror, and then I think they die through fright and through disgust itself, mirror, disgust, other things that are disgusting and things that are buried underground. Okay, so as a psychotherapist, all this is kind of on one level it's kind of a lot of kind of no shit Sherlock kind of moments in there, but also really interesting. It's kind of very classic kind of Freudian. So the unconscious and things buried, things underwater. Okay, so it's like Cthulhu, if I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is kind of trapped underwater and rises briefly from the deep, and then gets goes back down into the depths. So this is kind of like repressed material, or probably more suppressed material. And I've done a video on the difference between repression and suppression. So dark things, half-known things. I'm very interested in the moment, particularly about generational trauma, and how trauma from our grandparents can affect us, and without us being aware necessarily of the nature and content of that. And there seems to be more and more research into that. And I think this is what's going on with Lovecraft. There's all this dark stuff that's just below his level of awareness, but it rises up just enough to kind of torment and disgust him, or he pushes it back down again. So this ties in. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, which shocks some people because people think Jordan Peterson is this terrible right-wing transphobic person, which I don't think he is at all, unless I've got him wrong. I think he's somebody that has some interesting thoughts on freedom of speech, but he has some interesting thoughts on a lot of things. Very, very fascinating guy, Jordan Peterson. Okay. And he's particularly interesting when he talks about the connection between psychology and politics. Okay. And one of the things he talks about a lot is how he doesn't think, people sort of think that racism, and particularly, we're talking about Hitler and the Nazis, that it was driven by a fear of other. And he says, no, close, but not quite right. It's about disgust. It's about disgust with other. Okay. And this fits to me so strongly with H.P. Lovecraft, that when he talks about, he talks about black people, he talks about people of mixed race, he talks about people of non-European descent, even Spaniards, he's disgusted by Spaniards. They're European. I guess he's kind of talking about, Northern European Aryans, anyone that's not Northern European Aryan. And a real kind of disgust. So with this kind of Nazi kind of psychology, there's a very strong fear of contamination, and it's all, there's a lot of contamination stuff. It's not that necessarily that from the little I've read, he talks a lot about disease as such, but he talks a lot about these things are kind of so disgusting that they will either send you mad or they will kill you. And obviously his parents were sent mad and then died, and he's kind of equated that with race. So I think that's really interesting. So the whole kind of, the central theme of, I guess two central themes really stand out for me. One is, repressed, things that are buried, pushed down, and disgust, contamination, things that are so disgusting by their very nature that they would send you mad. And that's kind of how psychologically, a horrible family secret kind of manifests, if you like, in that kind of metaphor. So, he's got this, the thing that he clings on to, the thing that gives him a sense of purity is his ancestry, that he comes from this aristocratic family, he's far from pure, they're sort of very into bread and things, but he kind of idealises that and sees that almost like as the master race, the pure, the well-bred, the high, the true, clings on to that, and of course that was threatened, his kind of, his status was threatened, and all that's embroiled with status. So what he clings to, is and sees as pure is fragile, and the monsters that lurk in his psyche are always just underneath the surface, trying to reach up. Or the characters kind of go down to meet them. The characters are, by some strange obsession, as even Reanimator, there's it's cellars, it's basements. It's always about going down, so it's like this curiosity that, there's something that won't go away, there's something that keeps on nagging at him that he has to go down and explore, and that's kind of this repressed material that's, and he certainly was a very mentally ill man, struggled with lots of neuroses. Other thing I notice, not so much, it's not a psychological level, but that lots of the characters don't live very long in Lovecraft stories. And neither did he. He died, I think, at 46. So very, very tragic. But I think this thing about disgust and racism, which Jordan Peterson talks about, is really interesting, really useful thing to be aware of in modern times, where racism and fascism are on the rise. People aren't using these words, but it's there. It's there big time. And when we talk about things like immigration, we talk about Mexicans kind of coming across the border, really to build a sterile wall to keep this impurity out. And the other thing Jordan Peterson says, which I think is really, really fascinating, he maintains that where Nazi and fascist regimes have come to power, there's nearly always been, at the same time, some fear of disease. That where there's kind of a fear of contagion or disease, that's when Nazism is at its strongest, which I think is interesting. So there we go. Howard Philip Lovecraft, first impressions, mainly from a kind of psychological perspective. Tell me if I'm wrong. I may be wrong on lots of things there. I've only read a small amount. These are first impressions. Please put a comment. Please create some discussion. and hopefully I'll learn a little bit more about H.P. Lovecraft in the process. Hope that's been interesting. Rangimarie.